Why is leaving academia so hard? My name's Chris. I run the blog Roostervane.com, and I want to talk specifically to those of you who are still in academia. I've told my story in other videos about how and why I left academia, why it was the best decision of my life. But there are a lot of people still hanging on to academia in hopes of becoming tenured or tenure track professors. And many of these people are in postdocs. Many of them are adjuncts who are really kind of precariously employed. Some of them are still in PhDs trying to decide what to do next. So I want to talk to you for a minute if you fall into one of those three categories. The reality is that I think the cycle of academia, like the cycle of work in academia, makes it really hard to leave. And this is pretty obvious with the way the academic job market works, that often if you're starting to think about applying for jobs in like one summer, you can basically go all the way through the process. If you get an interview, on-campus interview, whatever, like you're basically going through the process all the way through to the next year. And then by the time that process is done, and by the time you don't get offered a tenure track job, basically you can just start the process all over again because it's almost time. So I think a lot of people get into this really difficult cycle where it's hard to know when to actually cut and walk away. I would even say it's almost impossible to know when to cut and walk away, because the really cruel thing about academia is that there's always the hope that this year will be the year. It's always going to be there. I've talked to people who have been in postdocs for like 8 years and they're still holding out hope that they are going to get that tenure track offer this year. So I just want to share a few thoughts about knowing when it's actually time to leave academia. So the first thing I need to say is that it's very unlikely anybody's going to ever tell you, okay, it's time to go. It's very unlikely that a supervisor, mentor, whatever is going to say to you, especially if they're kind of hostile to non-academic work, which some supervisors are, it's very unlikely that somebody's going to say to you, okay, now is the time for you to start looking beyond the academy. It's unfortunate, but I haven't seen it happen a lot. If your supervisor did do that, fantastic. But for a lot of people, that doesn't happen. So the reality is that leaving isn't actually just something difficult that you need to do. It also requires kind of swimming against the current. It actually requires like pushing back against all the conventional wisdom that just says, hold on for another year and you'll get hired. Good people always get jobs. My students always get jobs, whatever. So if you're deciding to walk away, it might be a decision you have to make on your own with relatively little support. Some faculty are openly hostile to non-academic work, and some are just kind of useless in that they might wish you well, but they don't actually know how to help you. So the first thing is that it's going to be on you to take ownership of deciding when it's time. There's never going to be anyone telling you. And I think that's what makes it so hard for a lot of students and why it's so easy to stay in limbo. I think the second reason it's so hard to leave is because you're stepping into the unknown. It's one thing to stay and kind of, even if it's a really crappy system, you at least have this idea that you've got, adjunct roles or postdocs or, visiting prof roles or whatever. You might kind of be able to cobble together an imagined future for yourself, even if it's not your ideal one of being a tenure track professor. But when you actually look at what's beyond, it makes you just kind of see this like dark hole. Basically, you don't know what it's going to be. You don't know what your work is going to look like. In many cases, you probably don't even know what you can do with your degree. So I think one of the best ways to confront this, and you can do this really proactively, is through networking. If you start to look beyond, start to talk to people outside. I created a whole website to tell these stories. There are lots of them on the website. I'll link to some down below. Essentially, if you start by exploring, it's going to open up a lot of agency for you to start to imagine what a different path could look like other than academia. And that's often one of the first steps. I think it can be really rare for people to just cut and run. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes I see people who are just like, I'm done with academia, never going back. But often what ends up happening is people sort of do a slow walk, dipping a toe in, coming back. And so the sooner you can get that exposure to the outside world, the sooner you can start to grow your network, consider possibilities, start to understand what some of the alternative paths might be for you, the sooner you can get out. And that's a really great thing because you might even get excited about your options outside, which is ultimately kind of what happened to me. So you can start to do some of that work no matter where you're at, even if you're, second, third year in your PhD. Start to build that network before you actually need it, and start to get a sense of even how you might even change the direction of your current project based on non-academic roles that you see. I started to talk about economics in mine and kind of diaspora theory because I wanted something that would fit a little bit outside of the academy that I could talk about. I think it's also really hard to leave because, let's be honest, the system is benefiting from your work. So I see a lot of people who are paid way less than what they're worth. They're doing all this kind of free and extra labor, really pouring their soul and their heart and soul into what they do. And the payment for that labor isn't money. It might be the carrot of like, oh yeah, we'll have a tenure track job next year opening up and you'd be perfect for it. How many times have I heard people tell me that that's what they were told and then that just never happened or disappeared? But the reality is that a lot of people I see have trouble leaving academia because of sort of the mythology around academia, but also the very real feeling of being needed. So like my students need me, I'm contributing to my department, I'm doing good work. And that might all be true, but if you are doing all those things and you're totally financially precarious or you're on food stamps or whatever, it sort of defeats the purpose of you doing good work. The reality is that you got to take care of yourself first, and then you can start to, serve and take care of other people. But if you're not being kind to yourself and putting your needs, I don't want to say it in front of the needs of others, but you have to, I like to think of the analogy of a jug, that a jug can only pour out what's being poured into it. And it's a good analogy for serving, that a lot of times when we feel like we're helping people, if we're not being filled up, and in this case I'm thinking specifically being filled up with money and compensation and actually being rewarded for our work in other ways than just empty promises, we can't really do that kind of service work. So there's always reasons to stay because of the students, because the students are great. There's always reasons to stay because you like the research you're doing, and you might not be able to do exactly that research if you leave. But if that's not healthy for you, if that's a system that you're being exploited and you're being bullied or whatever, then it's probably time to think about something different. The other reason I think people have a lot of trouble leaving academia is that we tend to think of academia as the place where we get to be happy. I think really it's common, this idea that academia is uniquely fulfilling. And I mean, I hate to say it, but it's not. I mean, I have tenured professors calling me all the time, telling me how unhappy they are, how much they want to get out. And I mean, the flip side, I've worked a lot of roles outside of academia. I've worked in government policy. I've worked for a think tank. I've worked a ton of different consulting roles. And I mean, work is work. Some of it's crap, but some of it's immensely fulfilling. And what happens is when you get out in your career, you're going to find things that you love. You're going to find things that light you up. We have this idea that work happiness comes from like subject matter expertise, that I need to like keep working on Shakespearean clothing to be happy. And that's not true at all. I mean, work happiness comes from learning. It comes from using skills that you have that you never thought that you could apply in another place. So I absolutely don't buy the myth that you'll be miserable if you leave academia, that you'll be happier there. I kind of, anecdotally, most of the people I see are much happier once they get out of academia, especially once you get your feet on the ground and start to get some kind of career clarity, which, can take a little bit of time. But ultimately, life beyond is really, really happy. And I really love the work I do now, more so than I ever enjoyed my work in academia. There's one more thing I want to say. I just thought of this, that a lot of people seem to think it's their job to save academia. A lot of people are like, well, I know this is terrible, but if I stay here, I can make it better. And again, if that's something you want to do, and if it doesn't come at the cost of your, financial stability, your mental health or whatever, then that's fine, but it's not on your shoulders to fix this broken institution. It's really not. You don't have to feel at all guilty about going and finding other worthwhile things to put your time and energy into. And then, keep a foot in the door, adjunct if you want to, but it's absolutely not your job to fix or to save academia, to improve it, to whatever, that can't possibly fall on your shoulders. It really can't. So if that's the reason you're hanging on, maybe it's time to let go of that too. So all of these things are reasons why people have a lot of trouble leaving academia. I've heard most of the stories, and I think a lot of them are true for me too, that I really had trouble when it was time for me to leave. So this is just a reflection. I mean, ultimately, I can't really tell you what to do, but I hope you will at least look beyond, especially if you fit into that unhappy, underpaid, overworked category. I hope that you'll look beyond at all the amazing things you can do. I've got lots of resources on my website to help ultimately do what's right for you and your career. And if you've decided that it's time to leave, I wish you well. I wish you courage. There's lots out there for you. The world needs what you have to give. And your work doesn't only matter if it's inside the academy. It's going to matter wherever you find the place to kind of devote yourself to. So good luck.